Let me ask you a hard question. If you stopped working tomorrow, how long would your wealth last? One generation? Maybe two? Here's the truth. 90% of wealth is gone by the third generation. Not because people didn't try, but because they never learned to think generationally. And I've seen it happen. Families that started with nothing, built something, and then lost everything because they didn't understand the rules of legacy. Today, we're talking about how to break that cycle, how to create a plan that doesn't just protect wealth, but multiplies it for generations. If you're serious about breaking the cycle, listen up, take notes, and go follow and subscribe. My name is Anthony Brister, and this is a wealth planning podcast with Brister Law. And today we're talking about something that hits deeper than just tax savings or business structuring. We're talking about why 90% of families lose their wealth by the third generation, and how to make sure you're in that 10% that doesn't. Now, I know that does sound dramatic, but it's true. I see it every week with clients. People building empires without a blueprint, no idea or no plan on what happens next. And here's a twist. It's not because they didn't make enough money. It's because they're not thinking long term and they're not thinking generationally. This is why you're getting it wrong, and most people are getting generational wealth wrong. Most people think generational wealth is about how much money you make, but it's not about how long or how much you can make. It's about how long your money can last without you. Let me tell you about a family that I met a while ago. This grandpa built over $6 million real estate portfolio. He was an old school builder, very frugal. He never made more than 80 grand a year. He passed away, didn't have a will, no trust, no written plan. Well, 3 years later, that $6 million was chopped in half. There was legal fees, taxes, family court battles. One of the grandkids even took her share and bought a G-Wagon, but she never paid the property taxes on her inherited land. So she had to sell that family land in less than 2 years after she inherited. And this isn't uncommon, it's the norm, and that's the problem. Hustle builds income, but structure builds legacy. A client came to me recently. His dad was an immigrant and owned a retail store, and he'd worked there day to day for decades. He worked every day, but he saved every dollar he had and invested it in real estate. And that real estate now outpaces the store, and his son's taking over. But his dad, hardworking as he was, never had set up a trust or even planned for estate tax. And here's a kicker. He's well over the estate tax exemption, and he didn't even know that his estate would have an estate tax bill of several $million. Without any planning, there was a huge risk that the IRS was going to take a massive chunk of his estate and everything he'd worked hard for when he passed. But both the father and son came to me and they said, they didn't want the dad's life work just to disappear. So we built a structure with trust, a family limited partnership, did some gifting and other long-term planning tools to control the estate tax issue and, hopefully avoid a good bit of that estate tax. Because hustle doesn't equal protection, and the IRS already has a plan for your family if you don't. So let's just talk about basic estate planning too, because most of you don't have an estate tax problem. An estate plan isn't just a set of legal documents. It's a form of love. When I was 10 years old, my mom passed away. No will, no trust, no plan. What followed after really was heartbreaking. A funeral that should have been a moment of peace became a scene of conflict. Funeral, the whole grieving period was a battleground. Family members were arrested at the funeral. My brother and I didn't even get to go to the funeral. All of it because there was no plan, no guidance, and no legal clarity. That experience is what drives the work that I do today, and this is why I push people to get a will or just something in place, even if it's handwritten, not for the courts, but for your kids. I almost always recommend a revocable living trust, but you should at the very least have something in place, even if it is a will. If your entire wealth plan is built around this year's taxes, it's already broken. I asked a client the other day, what's your 30-year wealth plan? And he stared at me blankly. Man, I'm just trying to get through this quarter. It's totally understandable, but that mindset, that's what kills legacy. I have another client to contrast, is a doctor, and he came in, he said, I want everything tight and secure. I'm getting busier, I'm acquiring more. He had multiple LLCs, growing income, but no long-term structure. We were able to build a full strategy. He had a plan for the year, but also had a plan to acquire 3 more practices over the next 5 years. And he also structured his business to protect what he's worked so hard to build from the risk that he carries in his day-to-day business. Why? Well, because wealth isn't what you make, it's what you keep, protect, and pass on. Generational wealth stands on 3 legs: structure, stewardship, and story. Structure is your legal setup, so think LLCs, FLPs, trust, things like that, right? Stewardship is teaching your kids and your grandkids how to manage wealth, and then story is your why. Because here's the deal, if your kids inherit your money but not your mindset, they'll lose both. Real estate in your name isn't wealth, it's a liability. I had a couple reach out to me after watching some videos on asset protection. They owned their home in one state. They had 2 short-term rentals in 2 different states. They were all titled in their personal name. They had formed an LLC, but it wasn't even in any of the states that they lived in or where their properties were at. And they didn't have a revocable trust, no estate plan, but they had 2 minor kids. Their LLC wasn't giving them any asset protection that they needed. So we restructured everything. We moved the properties into their own LLC in a state where that property was located. We created a revocable living trust and a pour-over will, designated guardians in case something happened to them. And then we designed a tax plan that could shift if they decided to move states too. And all because the client just said, I just want to make sure we're not missing anything, and I want our kids to be okay if we're not here. Legacy isn't just something you build when you're older, it's something that you start right now. And I get this all the time. Anthony, I'm still in growth mode. I'll handle the legacy stuff later. Let me ask you, if something happened to you tomorrow, would your family know what to do? Who gets what? Who takes care of who? What would happen to your business? Do you think it would still grow or decline? So start now. You don't have to start with everything, just start with something. Get your estate plan done. Draft a succession plan. The rich don't act like people, they act like family offices. And you want to know the biggest shift I see with families who build wealth that lasts is they stop thinking like individuals and they start thinking like institutions. Think family vision statements, annual meetings, defined investment rules. They treat their wealth like a business with a mission, values, and a set of rules. You don't need to be a billionaire to do this. You just need to be intentional. Remember, legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's who you raise while you're here and what they do with it afterwards too. Generational wealth starts with what you teach. I tell every client this, right? If your kids don't know how taxes work, if they've never managed a budget, if they never made decisions about money, then your wealth is a ticking time bomb. Invite them to meetings, show them the numbers, Tell them about your mistakes, be vulnerable, and give them more than just money, give them mentorship. Everyone always says they don't teach you how money works in school, and this is true. And it's your job to teach your kids about wealth, or nobody will, and they're going to squander what you built. You probably have written a business plan, probably made a financial plan before, but have you ever actually written your legacy plan? Here's a challenge for you. Think about your family's 30-year vision. What do you want them to remember? What values do you want them to pass on? And what kind of life are you building for your great-grandkids? You don't need to have a law degree to do this. You just need clarity and a few quiet minutes. And you don't build generational wealth by accident. You build it by being intentional. You don't need millions to start. You just need the courage to think beyond yourself. So hopefully that was helpful. This is the Wealth Planning Podcast with Brister Law. I'm Anthony Brister. Thank you for tuning in. And if this hit home, please send this to someone that you're building wealth with. Thanks for sharing.